Or you could kind of say, hey, this is an excellent street for maybe actually doing chalk festivals or for marking it differently every year. And this suddenly becomes a street that people want to come see because every year the markings on it are different. Or every couple of months something artistic is happening on this street. And because the street doesn't get a lot of traffic, the only demands on the street are people coming into the credit union, and then there's a historic railroad building here that's now like a cigar company, and then there's a printing shop over here. There isn't a lot of demand on the street currently. You can still facilitate people moving and driving on here, but you begin doing a lot of different things to the street that are inexpensive. They communicate, hey, something new is happening in Brainerd. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of cool. So these kind of initial elements in phase one are just marking some changes, and the changes aren't permanent, but they are designed to kind of tap into people's maybe entrepreneurial spirit to collaborate and try something. In phase two, we're embracing this change that we need. We know that we need some changes within the city. We know we need new employment. We know we need to do something. And so maybe some of these changes are successful in terms of the program, and we begin embracing this. And so what does that look like? Well, some of the infrastructure, some of the things that happen within the landscape become a bit more permanent. Maybe what we do, instead of putting in temporary bicycle parking, we put in some permanent parking along with the vending machines that allow you to basically fix a flat if you arrive in town and your tire's flat now. Or you put in public drinking fountains, especially for those dog owners that are taking their dogs for a walk so they can drink too. Maybe instead of curbs, we get rid of the curbs on Front Street and you just put in bollards, and those bollards could be retracted during major events. There's a lot of different ways that you can separate cars and people. It doesn't have to be just a curb. The curb is fine, but there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Maybe you end up having bollards that provide a utility function, that provide power and water and other things. And maybe some of those bollards go in places where you begin to support street fairs or carnivals or festivals or temporary uses. And so within this environment, we'll revisit all of these again, but you'll notice on Front Street, maybe what we've done is some of those painting markings, those chalk markings have become more permanent, and this becomes a bit more of a pedestrian mall. Cars are still on it. Cars need it, that's fine, but we're saying, hey, people can use it too. Cars aren't using it that much. Maybe it's a bit more of a shared use. You'll also notice in this map that on this parcel up here, which is that green colored parcel that was of low value, this has been redeveloped. I'll just talk a little bit about this. What we've done here is we kept the same amount of parking that exists on that entire parcel right now, but we've moved it to the back along the railroad right-of-way, and we've put in 2 new buildings, 2 stories, that provide to help front that street better. Parking access is on the back, but you can still get street access from the front. The buildings open up both ways. You actually have Class A facilities. You provide a lot higher quality retail environment or office environment. And this is along a very busy street where you're already getting lots of traffic as a natural place to do something new. And so this provides an opportunity to begin, if you were going to do a new phasing of development, that could happen in here. And part of this is a bit of a park facility that fronts on the bottom of this street right here. Now, it's important to point out that this right-of-way, the street right-of-way, exists on the map. It's there, but the railroad owns that, and it's never actually been developed as the street. So there is the possibility of, at least from a pedestrian standpoint, could you begin accessing this right-of-way in the future, if you did something there. And this is directly south of the park that's up in that neighborhood. So looking at East River Parkway, I'll talk about these highlights in a little bit. What does that look like? Well, the painting gives way to actually separating the uses, putting in more of the plantings, actually calling it a parkway versus just River Road, and it connects the residential neighborhood to the north with the parkland to the south. You still keep all your driving, you still keep your car access, but now you've legitimately made this something that makes it natural to go from the neighborhood to another part of the city. And you've used the infrastructure to do this. Now, you wouldn't do this, you wouldn't spend this money until you saw enough people utilizing that painted part. If you painted it and more people started using that and there was a demand, that demand is going to come from those users, and they're going to say the paint's great, but it's still not as safe as it could be. And when they say we need something more, then you justify investment. You wouldn't do this first because right now there isn't that much demand. That wouldn't make much sense. Within this environment, of course, I talked a little bit about that. You fill that in. You get this retail, you get this office environment. You've got parking in the back. You've got this destination from the southern neighborhood. And the railroad likes these kinds of things. I talked to BNSF, and their concern is restricting access because they don't want people on their property and then having liability issues. So anything that you can do that's going to make the railroad happy is controlling access onto their property. And so a lot of these moves do that. So if you want the railroad on your side, that's the way to do that, is to help them control access onto their property. And then they're not going to be as hesitant to work with cities when they're trying to do things. Within the jail environment, not much has changed here, except instead of the paint, where there was paint, well, we'd have these bollards put in place. And these bollards, I'll zoom in here, these bollards separate this drive lane and then the parking that's here from the biking and the walking. But these bollards are lit up at night. They have lights, and the bollards that have utility connections and maybe water connections are lit up differently. And what this enables you then to do is annex part of this parking lot for larger scale kinds of events, for kinds of programs, for festivals, for things of that nature. But you wouldn't do this until, again, there was a demand for this kind of investment. If you open up these kinds of lots and these kinds of streets to trying to do more festivals, to Brainerd celebrates year-round. So this is a great thing. So what does that look like every day, every weekend on a regular basis? Hosting festivals, getting people to collaborate on programs. As that gets more and more successful, then you can justify costlier infrastructure investments such as that. You'll see as you come down here what that looks like. You got your 9-foot lane that's given over to along the back of the building. You still keep your one-way drive. You got your angled parking, and nothing else really changes. You can, and the thing about this is if you have the bollards on both sides, both within the power lamps and over here, you can extend the programming across the entire parking lot if you needed to. Now, visiting this parking lot twice in the last year, in the spring and in the last fall, this lot's never completely full, at least when I've seen it. And so there is the possibility of potentially working with the county of being able to give the lot over to some kinds of alternative uses at times. And since the jail is right there, security is not an issue. Other possible kinds of programming, this is just something that's being done in some other places. Those lots are soaking up sunshine year-round. Maybe this isn't cost-effective yet, but maybe it would be. Why not get a return on that investment? Spend a little bit more and actually generate some power. You feed that back in, and maybe the power that you generate from these things begins to support entrepreneurship in the downtown. Hey, if you're a new business, we can give you reduced power or free power for that first year when startup's really hard. How do we maybe reduce some of those fixed costs or some of those variable costs to make it easier to reduce some of that risk in a startup? Within Front Street environment, see these markings are different. And again, we're giving it over to this festival environment. More plantings, more trees, more interesting, crazy things that draw people to downtown Brainerd. The whole region's beautiful, but as you notice, most of the downtown, most of the central part of the city lacks what most of the region has. There's no access to water other than the river, and there's not really access to it, and there's hardly any trees. There's no canopy here. So maybe we begin introducing some of those elements that attract people to the region, and they're part of the downtown environment, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do that. And if you ask the citizens to be involved in this, then you're creating accountability and you're building bridges between city leaders and city residents. And I've talked to a lot of people in this town, And they continue to talk about the kind of divide between decision makers and everyone else. Well, these are possible ways where maybe we can begin bridging